It was about survival. The same survival instinct that had kept her alive during the war was telling her 30 years later that some doors should stay closed, that some memories should stay locked away, that you can honor the past without reliving it, that you can remember without performing. Steven Spielberg years later said in an interview, "I offered Audrey Hepburn a role once. She turned it down. At the time I didn't understand. I thought she was being difficult. I thought she was afraid of the challenge. But now, knowing what I know about trauma, about PTSD, about what she lived through, she wasn't afraid of the challenge. She was protecting herself. And that takes a different kind of courage than anything I could have asked her to do on screen." Audrey died in 1993. She never did a Holocaust film, never told her war story publicly beyond that one interview, never cashed in on the $10 million. But she also never had the breakdown that playing that role would have caused. Never destroyed herself for art, never sacrificed her mental health for a performance. And in the end, that was the right choice. Not the brave choice, not the noble choice, not the choice that would have won awards or made headlines or impressed Hollywood. The right choice, for her sanity, for her survival. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no, even when they're offering $10 million, even when they're offering an Oscar, even when they're offering importance and prestige and the chance to tell a story that matters. Sometimes the bravest thing is knowing your limits and refusing to cross them. Even if no one understands, even if no one agrees, even if the whole world is telling you you're wrong. Audrey Hepburn knew her limits. She knew that some prices are too high. She knew that her piece was worth more than any role. And she said no. That's the story Hollywood doesn't tell. The story about the $10 million role that Audrey Hepburn walked away from. Not because she didn't care, not because she wasn't talented enough, not because she was afraid of the work, but because she knew herself, knew her trauma, knew that survival isn't just about living. It's about protecting what you've built. It's about honoring your limits. It's about choosing yourself, even when the cost is enormous. She chose herself, and that choice, that decision to protect her own mental health over everything else, might have been the most important performance she never gave. No, tell them I've thought about it. Tell them I'm honored. Tell them I hope the film is everything Steven wants it to be. But tell them I can't do it, and I won't change my mind. The story leaked, as stories in Hollywood always do. By the end of the week, it was in the trades. Hepburn turns down Spielberg's Holocaust drama, cites personal reasons. People speculated. Was she asking for more money? Was there a scheduling conflict? Was she retiring? Nobody guessed the truth. That Audrey Hepburn was still 30 years later too traumatized by World War II to even pretend to relive it. One person did understand, though. A journalist named Hendrik van der Berg. He was Dutch. He'd been a child during the war. He'd written about Holocaust survivors before. And when he read about Audrey turning down the role, he understood immediately. He wrote her a letter, not for publication, just for her. "Dear Miss Hepburn, I read that you turned down a role about the war. I think I understand why. I was 7 years old during the hunger winter. I remember the hunger. I remember the fear. I remember watching our Jewish neighbors being taken. And I remember thinking, for years afterward, that I should have done something. Should have helped. Should have saved them. I know now that I was 7, that there was nothing I could have done. But the guilt doesn't care about logic. It just sits there, heavy and permanent, reminding me that I survived and they didn't. I imagine you carry similar weight. I imagine you've spent 30 years wondering if you could have done more, if you should have done more. And I imagine that acting out those memories, even for art, even for $10 million, would be unbearable. I wanted you to know that I understand, that you made the right choice, that your peace of mind is worth more than any film. With great respect, Hendrik." Audrey kept that letter. Read it whenever she doubted her decision. Which was often, because the truth was, part of her wanted to do the role. Part of her wanted to tell the story. Wanted to make sure people knew. Wanted to honor the families that didn't survive. Wanted to be Sarah Van Peltz's voice, since Sarah never got to grow up and speak for herself. But she knew herself well enough to know that she couldn't, that it would break her, that there's a difference between honoring the dead and destroying yourself in the process. Spielberg eventually made a different film about the Holocaust. Schindler's List. It won Best Picture. It changed how the world talked about the Holocaust. It was exactly the kind of important, powerful, meaningful work he'd wanted to make. and Audrey watched it alone in her home in 1994. Well, she tried to watch it. She made it 20 minutes before she had to turn it off. Because even just watching, even just seeing the reenactment of things she'd witnessed in real life, was too much. She sat in the dark afterward and thought about what might have happened if she'd said yes. If she'd taken that $10 million. If she'd played Anna, she would have broken, completely, irreparably. And maybe she would have won the Oscar. Maybe she would have given the performance of her lifetime. Maybe critics would have called it brave and raw and unforgettable. But she would have paid for it with her sanity, with her sleep, with her peace, with whatever fragile equilibrium she'd built over 30 years of trying to move forward while carrying the past. In 1989, 13 years after turning down Spielberg, Audrey did her first and only interview about the war. A Dutch journalist asked her directly, "Did you see Jewish families being taken?" Audrey's face changed, became very still, very careful. "Yes." "Did you know them?" "Yes." "Did any of them survive?" "No." "How do you live with that?" Audrey was quiet for a long time. Then, "Not very well. I think about them constantly. I wonder if they knew, if they were scared, if it hurt. I wonder if the children cried. I wonder if their parents could comfort them or if they were too frightened themselves. I wonder these things at 3 a.m. I wonder these things in the middle of the day. I wonder these things when I'm supposed to be happy, supposed to be celebrating something. The wondering never stops." "Would you ever want to tell that story? Your story?" "No," Audrey said immediately. "Absolutely not. Some things are too painful to perform. Some memories are too sacred to turn into entertainment. And yes, I know films can be art. I know they can be important. But I also know myself, and I know my limits. And telling that story, my story, is beyond my limits." That interview ran in a Dutch newspaper. Most of the world never saw it. But the people who did understand finally why Audrey Hepburn turned down $10 million. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the role. It wasn't even about Spielberg or the script. "Audrey, if it's the money, we can negotiate. If it's the schedule, it's not the money, it's not the schedule. It's me. I can't do this role." "Why not? You're perfect for it. The character is practically based on—" "I know," she interrupted. "That's the problem. I don't understand." She took a breath. "Stephen, I was there. I was in Holland during the war. I was hidden. I watched Jewish families being taken. I saw children who looked exactly like the children in your script. I saw things that I've spent 30 years trying not to remember, and you're asking me to remember all of it, to perform it, to live in it for months. I can't. But that's exactly why you'd be so good. You understand?" "I understand too much," she said, her voice breaking. "That's the problem. For you, this is a story. It's important. It's meaningful. It's art. For me, it's not a story. It's Tuesday, March 14th, 1944. It's watching the Van Pelt's family being loaded into trucks. It's seeing their daughter Sarah, who was 9 years old and used to play in our street, crying and looking back at her house one last time. It's knowing I would never see her again. It's being powerless. It's being terrified. It's being so hungry that I ate tulip bulbs and thought they were a feast." She was crying now. She couldn't help it. "Your character, Anna, she has this scene where she testifies about what she saw. She talks about the faces, the children, and she says I can still see them when I close my eyes. Stephen, I don't need to act that scene. I live that scene. Every time I close my eyes, I see Sarah Van Pelt's. I see the Rosenberg family. I see the Cohens. I see all of them, all the people who didn't come back, all the empty houses, all the children who never grew up. Audrey, I had no idea." "Nobody does," she said. "I don't talk about it. I can't. Because if I start, I'm afraid I'll never stop. I'm afraid I'll fall into it and never climb back out. And you're asking me to jump in voluntarily, to immerse myself in the worst memories I have, to perform trauma that's still raw after 30 years. I can't. I'm sorry, but I can't. What if we changed the character, made her less—" "It doesn't matter what you change," Audrey said. "The moment I step onto a set dressed like 1944 Holland, the moment I have to act like I'm watching Jewish families being taken, I'm not acting anymore. I'm remembering, and I can't control what happens when I remember." Spielberg was quiet. Then, "What do you mean you can't control it?" Audrey hesitated. She'd never told anyone this. not even her closest friends. But something about this moment, this conversation, made her want to be honest. I have nightmares, she said. Still, 30 years later, I dream that I'm back there, that the war never ended, that I'm still hiding, still starving, still watching people disappear. Sometimes I wake up and I can't remember where I am, can't remember that it's over, can't remember that I'm safe. I didn't know. How could you? I've spent my entire career playing elegant, sophisticated, carefree women. I've built a whole image around grace and lightness. Nobody knows that underneath, I'm still that terrified 15-year-old girl hiding in an attic, praying the soldiers don't find me. Maybe that's exactly why you should do this role, Spielberg said gently. Maybe it would help. Maybe telling the story, being Anna, maybe it would give you a way to process. Or maybe it would destroy me, Audrey cut in. Maybe it would trigger something I can't come back from. Maybe I'd have a breakdown on set. Maybe I'd hurt myself. Maybe I'd hurt the film. I can't risk it, Stephen. I'm sorry, but I can't. She hung up before he could respond, and then she sat in her study and cried for 2 hours. The next day, her agent called. Audrey, what happened? Spielberg's people are saying you turned down $10 million. Are you insane? Possibly, Audrey said. Do you know what $10 million is? Do you know what this role could do for your career? I know exactly what it could do for my career, and I know exactly what it would do to me, and the second thing outweighs the first. Audrey, think about this. This is Spielberg. This is an Oscar. This is my mental health, Audrey said firmly. This is my ability to sleep at night. This is my sanity, and that's worth more than $10 million. That's worth more than an Oscar. That's worth more than anything Hollywood can offer me. Her agent sighed. Can I at least tell them you'll think about it? The phone rang at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in October 1976. Audrey Hepburn was in her garden in Rome cutting roses. She almost didn't answer, but something made her walk inside, pick up the receiver, and say hello. Audrey, it's Steven Spielberg. She knew who he was, of course. Everyone did. Jaws had just become the biggest film in history. He was 29 years old and already changing cinema, and he was calling her. Steven, what a lovely surprise. I'm calling because I'm developing a project, something important, something that matters, and I wrote a role specifically for you. I can't imagine anyone else playing it. Audrey sat down. Directors didn't usually call personally. They sent scripts through agents. The fact that Spielberg was calling himself meant this was different. Tell me about it, she said. It's about the Holocaust, but not the way it's usually told. It's about a woman who survived, who was hidden as a child, who saw things, lost people, and decades later she's finally ready to tell her story, to testify, to make sure the world never forgets what she witnessed. Audrey's hand tightened on the phone. She could feel something cold spreading through her chest. The character is Dutch, Spielberg continued. She was hidden in Holland during the war, saw Jewish families being taken, watched neighbors disappear, experienced the starvation winter. She's in her late 40s now, finally speaking publicly about what she saw. It's powerful, Audrey, and you're the only person who can do it justice. Silence. Audrey, are you there? She was there, but she couldn't speak, because the moment he said hidden in Holland, she was 15 again, hungry again, terrified again, watching through a crack in the floorboards as Nazi soldiers searched the house below, holding her breath, knowing that one sound, one movement meant death. Audrey? I'm here, she managed. Her voice sounded strange, distant. I know this is heavy material. I know it's challenging, but that's why I need you. You understand Europe. You understand that time period. You have the gravitas, the humanity, and frankly, you're one of the few actresses who could make American audiences care about this story. Stephen, She stopped, started again. What's the offer? $10 million, lead role, guaranteed Oscar campaign. This is prestige, Audrey. This is important work. This is the kind of film that changes how people see history. $10 million, more than she'd made in her entire career combined, for one film. I need to read the script, she said. Of course, I'll messenger it to you today. But Audrey, I want you to know, this role was written for you. Every word. I kept imagining your face, your voice, the way you convey pain without saying anything. This character, she's lived with this trauma for 30 years. It's shaped everything about who she is. And I think you understand that kind of burden. He had no idea how much she understood. The script arrived 6 hours later. Audrey sat in her study and read it in one sitting, and with every page, she felt herself being pulled back, not to the character, to herself, to 1944, to 1945, to the winter that never really ended. The character's name was Anna. She was Dutch, 47 years old. She'd been hidden by a Christian family during the war. She'd seen her Jewish neighbors, a family with 3 children, taken away. She'd watched from an attic window. She could still remember their names, could still see the youngest child's face. Audrey put the script down and walked to her bedroom, opened a drawer she rarely touched. Inside was a small wooden box. She opened it. Inside were photographs. Her mother, her brothers, and one photograph she'd taken herself in 1945, just after liberation. A house on her street, empty, windows broken. The family that had lived there was gone. Jewish family, 6 people, all dead. She'd kept the photograph for 31 years, never shown it to anyone, never talked about it. She picked up the phone and called Spielberg. "Steven, I read it." "And?" "I can't do it." Silence on his end now.